Hi, my name is Carrie Lee. I oversee the Career Planning Development Center here at Webster University. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of tips to think about when job searching as an international student. So if you're looking for OPT or CPT experiences. So the first thing is that you want to make sure that you are understanding the processes for CPT or OPT later on. So you need to make sure that you know if you're eligible and when. And, if you are, in a STEM program, obviously for some of you, you will be able to potentially take advantage of the STEM OPT extension later on. So international recruitment and student services has great workshops like this one, and they also have other information available on their connections page. So if you have not gone through that, that's a great starting point. You want to be proactive. So when you are applying for things, obviously, you will have to be applying for internships for CPT and get that internship offer before you actually submit the paperwork to your academic department and to international services for that approval. So you need to be planning ahead. You want to make sure that you are not leaving things till the last minute because everyone is busy. They can't necessarily guarantee that they're going to get to paperwork if you're doing things right before a term starts. That may be not likely to work out. So there are multiple departments that may be able to answer different types of questions regarding, CPT and OPT. So we all have different areas of expertise and we can answer different types of questions. So for instance, if you are looking for an internship opportunity because you'd like to do a CPT experience, you can reach out to Career Planning and Development and talk through your resume and ways to improve that, how to search for opportunities, practice interviewing, all of those sorts of skills. If you are asking me questions about, paperwork or how to fill out things, visa compliance rules, that is not my area, right? So I'm not necessarily going to be able to answer those questions. So just know that we all try to help as we can, but we all sort of have different scopes. So in terms of degree relevance, internships for CPT or later on for OPT have to be directly related to your degree program. So this is a requirement from the government. There is no list of approved or unapproved job titles. So it is a little bit subjective of what is in fact directly related. International services and myself in the CPDC, we can't necessarily give you a definitive answer as to yes, this position is 100% related or not, because we are not really the ones that make those determinations. So for CPT, your contact for your academic department is the one that will initially review your CPT application. And so if they have concerns about the degree relevance, they will let you know that because they're the experts in their own field. So they're the ones who make that initial determination for CPT. For OPT later on, it's really more between you and the government. So that is why we always try to be helpful, but we can't really officially give you an answer as to yes, this is related or not. You have to feel confident in your own sort of determination of that. And so for, like the CPT or OPT, you may need to provide like a brief rationale of how this kind of meets with your degree program if that's asked for. So there are a few things that you want to keep in mind. The job description is the most important part. So if you are looking at an internship, for instance, for CPT, what are the job responsibilities? So what you would be doing every day, what are the requirements? So they might require that you're a current student studying computer science degree or IT or something similar. If that is all lining up, So you can say, yes, they're asking for my degree type or something similar, because sometimes different universities have slightly different naming conventions. Are the job responsibilities things that maybe you've learned about in your classes that are required for your degree program? If they're asking for particular skills, so if it's like a data analytics position and they're asking for experience with Power BI and you've learned about that and done projects with that as part of your classes, right? That's helping show that there is a little bit more relevance there. So that is really important. For the industry, for the job title, that may or may not matter as much. So obviously, if there's something like you're a data analytics degree student and the job description is for a data analyst, that's obviously a pretty good initial sign that there's some relevance there. It doesn't necessarily have to be the words data analyst as the title. Different companies do have different naming conventions. So again, the job responsibilities are, what you want to look at. But that job title can help kind of show relevance. For the industry, there might be things where, like, if you're an information technology management student and it's at a company that does IT consulting for other companies, again, that might help you have, kind of a better case to show that that's related. But you could also work at an IT job at a different type of company, right? You can work in IT in a university, at, a marketing company, whatever it might be. So the more that you can clearly and obviously connect your degree and what you've learned from that to that internship or job posting, the better off you will be. It's not necessarily always that there's going to be this immediate check. Like I said, for the CPT process, your academic department contact will review it. So they will make sure that everything kind of looks aligned. But, every time that you're applying for things, or if you're down the road applying for something like OPT or another visa, know that they can always go back, right? They can always look at your previous I-20s and things. So if there is some issue where some official later on down the road says, wait, it really looks like you were not using this as intended, this doesn't seem to have any relation to your degree, that could cause problems in the future, or they might ask you for more information. So just know that the better off you can relate those, the less likely there is to be any issues in the future. So if you have some experience, so if you're doing like a graduate degree here at Webster, and maybe you have an undergraduate degree in something else, you've had some work experience, that can help you in the job search. So that might make you more competitive for certain types of roles. But at the end of the day, your internship for CPT or, your job for OPT, they have to be related to your current degree program that you are studying here at Webster. That is very important. So, for instance, like maybe if you are making a career shift, you might look for roles that are in your previous industry, but the job is related to your current degree program. So that might be something where you can kind of say, yes, I have a better understanding of these processes that, your company does, the services you offer to your customers, things like that, but you can't rely on those previous degrees or experience, because if it would not be appropriate or related for, CPT, for instance, you don't have work authorization to do that unless it's a on-campus student employment. So it is just important to make sure that you're looking through these things. In terms of job searching timelines, you want to be proactive and you want to be doing things early. It is not uncommon for job searches to take 3 to 6 months. If you have really specific interests, you're very location bound, the job market isn't as good, these are all things that can contribute and might make it more challenging. But starting early is going to be helpful to increasing your likelihood of success. So for internships, employers typically are going to offer those by your academic semester. So either fall, spring, or summer. Outside of some kind of more unique cases, they are not typically going to post terms like we do for our grad program. So like fall one, it's not particularly common that you would see an internship stating they are looking for an intern between August to October, right? That would be fairly unusual. It doesn't mean that you can't make that happen, but that is much more likely something you're going to have to arrange individually. Or they may say, well, we want an intern from September to December. And so it might be possible for you to do an internship in fall one and fall two, and you would submit the CPT paperwork, for both terms as appropriate, but just know that it's typically going to be more semester based. Summer tends to be the most common for internships because that's sort of most traditional, that students are not typically in classes as much. There are fall and spring internships. There are differences based on industry. So, if you're in accounting or tax type positions, obviously there's a lot more of those in the spring because of tax season, so there might be some different variability there. For spring or summer internships, a lot of times those postings will be, in the fall semester. So for some companies, they will post an internship in September for somebody they want to start the following summer. So it's almost a full year in advance. For some things, they might be posting in kind of the beginning of the fall term for a spring, January start. So, kind of keep that in mind. There are some that have shorter timelines. So, there are employers that post their summer internships in January and February, sometimes smaller, more local kind of nonprofits or businesses. They might post something in March, kind of more of this spring too. That's possible. That's not going to be a lot. So most people are going to be planning a little bit ahead because they will go through applications. They will look at, information to say who do they want to interview, make their final decisions of who they're going to onboard. So again, if it's a larger company, it's more well-known, they're more likely to get more applicants. That process is probably going to take a little bit longer than a small business that's hiring, one intern or something. So that's kind of a typical timeline for that. For internships, the majority of internships these days, I would say, are paid. There are sometimes certain industries or disciplines that are more likely to have unpaid internships, but most are. So at the end of the day, as long as it is legal, you could do an unpaid internship for your CPT experience. So for instance, if it's like a nonprofit or for-profit companies, you really need to be benefiting more from that situation. So if you're doing really more training than contributing work, things like that, there are certain regulations that kind of govern that as to, when employers have to pay you or if it is okay to do an unpaid opportunity if you are okay with that yourself. For full-time jobs, there are certain positions that have a longer recruiting cycle. So sometimes for particular programs like rotational programs where you go through and experience different departments of a company or kind of leadership development programs, they are much more likely to recruit in the fall, kind of for, maybe a traditional summer start. For other programs, other job opportunities, they're just going to be as needed. So, they say, oh, we always like to kind of bring on some new entry level talent, probably more of those kind of typical, late spring, summer timelines. If somebody leaves a job and they're refilling the position, if their fiscal year is starting, and so maybe they have more budget because they're doing well, they have a lot of projects that they need help with. So, different companies have different fiscal years, so that can be at different times of the year. So know that there is not any like one exact time of when you graduate or when those full-time job positions will be open. When you're applying to opportunities, having a good resume is the first thing that they're going to look for, because they're going to look through their applicants and they're going to see, do you have a relevant degree? Do you have relevant skills or experiences? Is this something we want to read more? So employers will often kind of make those initial judgments in the first 10 seconds or so. So if they're not seeing any relevant information, they're not seeing, anything that stands out, or they're seeing that you have a bunch of weird formatting choices and typos, they may just move on to the next candidate. So that's why that first glance is so important. And so you want to make sure that you are using a US style resume, obviously, for any applications for jobs in the US. So 1 page is very typical for students and newer professionals. 2 pages is okay. If you have more experience, you are actually using that second page. But for a lot of students, probably the 1 page at this point makes more sense. And you want to think about it from an employer perspective. So the most important thing should be first on your resume. So for most people, that is going to be your education, because if you're applying for an internship, they want to know that you are a currently enrolled student. What are you studying? When are you graduating? So that's why you want your education section at the top. After that, it is up to you. So if you have relevant projects that you want to talk about, if you've had maybe some previous experience that's related, if you want to have your skills next, because that's the most relevant thing, your involvement, that is up to you. So you can kind of change up that order as needed. And you want to make sure that you are tailoring your document as you need to. So if you're a business administration student, you might list different skills. You might kind of talk about your experiences a little bit differently if you're looking for a job that's more finance related versus something that is maybe more like kind of administration related or HR or something. So make sure that they're seeing that relevant information first. For US style resumes, you don't want to include any type of sensitive information. So this is sometimes common in other parts of the world, but for the US, you do not want to have a photo of yourself. You don't want to have any sort of like ID numbers, your birthday, race, religion, family information, citizenship, anything like that. You don't want that on there. So this is just an example resume. We have more information on our connections page about resume writing, other examples. Your resume does not have to look exactly like this by any means, but you can see that, there are clear section headers. There's dates on the right. You can clearly see that if this fake student is, looking for accounting jobs, they have their degree information, they have their relevant experience first, their less related experience later on in the document. So just to kind of give you a sense of what might be typical. We also have our standards. So if you have submitted a resume on Handshake before and gotten feedback from us, this is what we're looking at. This is also on our connections page. So again, just what I talked about, that 1 or 2 pages, you're including all your relevant Webster degree information. It's clearly consistently formatted. You have descriptions for your experiences. You don't have sensitive information, things like that. Cover letters are a little bit more of a US thing. So not every job will require a cover letter. Some may be optional and some don't necessarily want them. So make sure that you are just reading the information for the job posting, what they're asking for. So if the internship, requires a cover letter, this is just a 1-page document where you are going to talk about why are you interested in this job and how you would be a good fit. So you want to kind of have that sort of business letter tone. It should be formal, but it doesn't need to be research paper formal. And cover letters should be different for every position that you apply to. So if you are applying for very similar opportunities, like if they're all finance internships, that doesn't mean that you have to rewrite your entire letter every time, but you should always be adjusting it slightly. So if you're applying to a finance related role at Edward Jones or a local credit union, right? You might talk about slightly different things about why you're interested in that organization. And there could be some slight differences in the job responsibilities or requirements that you want to make sure and address. So, again, if you are applying to similar things, that saves you a little bit of time. You know, you can kind of use some of the information, but you do want to adjust it slightly to make it clear what it's for. And, you know, same thing as anything else, just make sure you proofread. This is, again, just an example. So, you know, your contact information at the top, the date you're submitting it, sort of a more traditional instance to include their background information. So if you're applying to a really big company, you don't know directly who to specify it to, that's okay. You can just say something like "Dear hiring manager" and leave out that address information. And then you can see here, they start off talking about this is what they're applying to, this is why they're interested, their sort of main qualifications. That middle section is really about, you know, going into more detail of your related skills, knowledge, experience, how that fits with the job description. And then kind of that summary at the end to say, you know, thank you for your time. Here's how to get in contact with me, that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, your degree is really a minimum qualification. So, you know, for most opportunities, if they're asking you, you know, for this internship, you need to be a current student in this degree program, right? That's the kind of main qualification, but you want to make sure and do things beyond that. So there are different types of experiences that you can gain. There's different things that employers value. So you just want to make sure that you can show what else are you doing besides the bare minimum. So, you know, if you are doing extra data analytics projects just to learn more because maybe your classes haven't covered very much with Tableau and you're seeing that that's something employers are asking for. So you kind of practice on your own time with that, right? Maybe you get involved in some student organizations on campus. So whether or not it's related, like if you're in the computer science club because you're a computer science major, or it's just something like the International Student Association. Either way, you can definitely list that in your resume. If you've had any leadership positions, like if you're a treasurer or vice president, that's great things to talk about. If you are working on your portfolio, if that's relevant for your discipline, if you've worked on campus at Webster, you've had other internships or work experiences, right? So just thinking about what else can you do to keep your skills current and to show that you're doing other things. So, you know, it's a little bit challenging as an international student because unfortunately there are employers that don't always understand the processes for things like CPT. There's also sometimes companies either that cannot hire international student because maybe, you know, they have a government contract and they're not allowed to hire, you know, anyone who's not a permanent resident. Maybe there are certain certifications you have to be eligible for that you wouldn't be. And then sometimes it is just a preference. You know, maybe it's just an opportunity where it requires a lot of training and they're concerned about, well, if we bring on an international student, it's not a given that they would be able to stay long term at the company. So, you know, for a lot of companies, it is not necessarily a yes or no question as to whether or not they hire international students. When I talk to employers, a lot of times what I get is it depends. You know, sometimes certain roles, they are more open to hiring international students because maybe they have a harder time getting a good candidate pool for those roles. Maybe there are certain skills that they really value. And for other positions, you know, it might be something that would be harder for them down the road if they were open to sponsoring somebody. And so they just say, well, doesn't really make sense for us to hire an international student for these types of opportunities. So, you know, in Handshake, employers can specify if they're open to CPT, if they're open to students with OPT, things like that. So again, it may not always be 100% accurate because sometimes that is a more global setting than individual job posting setting. But if they have said that they're open, obviously that's a good sign. right? They're more open to it, at least in some circumstances. So, you can start with those and then go into other employers that maybe haven't checked those boxes, because it doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't ever hire an international student. They just maybe didn't check that box because it's not as common for them, for instance. Going Global is a subscription resource that we have access to. So you can access that through Handshake or our connections page. And so there is a feature in Going Global where you can look at past H-1B visa records. So that is a longer term work visa. And so you can see that, Microsoft put in an H-1B visa application last year for a software engineer making $150,000 in Palo Alto, California, right? That is public record. So that is obviously a much bigger deal to try to sponsor someone. And so if employers are willing to do that, that is a good sign that they might be more open to something like CPT, where they don't have to pay you anything extra, right? You have to make sure that you're in compliance, that you're submitting the paperwork and getting approval from the university, but it's not really more complicated than beyond that. The Mosaic Project is a local nonprofit. They have some information on their website. So there might be some companies listed there that could be relevant that are a little more open to hiring international students. You can also use LinkedIn. So if you go to the Webster University page on LinkedIn, it will pull in alumni, so people who have listed a Webster degree in their education section, and you can search and see what companies our alumni work at. You can put in keywords if people are in a particular kind of industry or type of role. So that's sometimes a good way if you're just looking to get ideas of where other Webster alumni working in. When you are connecting with employers, whether that's through, a career fair, an employer information session through Handshake, through a community event, through something with your school or college, you want to do your best to show them why you're interested, why you're a good fit. And so you want to have that authentic connection and show an interest in their company. If you start off asking and you say, do you sponsor international students? Do you hire international students on a CPT? That is a good way to shut down the conversation, because oftentimes a lot of those recruiters, they may not know. They really may not have an exact answer to tell you, or if they say, no, unfortunately, we don't hire students, then that's just it. That's the end of the conversation, right? So it's a much better idea to kind of naturally talk about, oh, here's a little bit about me. I had these questions about your organization. Can you tell me more about your internship opportunities that are coming up for fall? So, you know, again, a lot of times with employers, if you know the process, you can explain it to them to say, yes, they, don't have to submit a bunch of complicated paperwork from their end. There's not extra fees to hire you. You can kind of talk them through that process. They may be a little bit more open to it, because if they say, yeah, you're a great fit, we want you, they're much more likely to figure that out than if they don't really know anything about you. So again, just kind of avoid bringing up sponsorship at the beginning of the process. For most companies, if they are willing to sponsor somebody who is a newer graduate, a lot of times that is a conversation that happens when you're working on OPT. So most people are not going to go straight from, a student to something like an H-1B visa, because that is just a very complicated and expensive process. So it's better not to confuse that with things like CPT or OPT. Because companies could absolutely hire you on CPT to do an internship for them, even if they aren't willing to sponsor international students long term. Doesn't mean that they couldn't hire you on as an intern. So you just want to make sure that you kind of always have your brief networking pitch, that introduction. So if you are connecting with employers, you can let them know, this is what you're studying, what you've kind of been up to, what you're looking for. And as you're applying to things, you're getting interviews, prepare for those interviews. Even if you're somebody who's a great conversationalist, interviewing is a skill. And so the more that you can speak to, this is how, my experiences are a good fit. You can practice responses to common interview questions like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Why are you interested in this company? Those things you want to make sure you have good answers for, because those are the types of things that you will very frequently get asked. I would always suggest going through the job description before an interview. So it's a good idea to save those job descriptions, because sometimes after they expire, you can't always go back to them otherwise. But look at what are the responsibilities. If they say that you have to do, this type of report, they may ask you an interview question to say, well, tell me more about how you've done these types of reports in the past. And we have more information linked in our connections about interviewing. So things like using the STAR method to kind of structure your answers to say, this is a situation, this is what I did, this was a result of my work. That's just kind of always a good way to prepare those. So if you're interested in, connecting one-on-one because you want to talk about interviewing or your internship search in more detail, you can schedule an appointment through Handshake. Like I mentioned, Going Global, you can access through Handshake resources. And, you're responsible for your own applications. There's never any guarantees, but the more prepared you are, if you're starting early, you're sending out those applications, tailoring them, the more likely you are to be successful and get that internship offer that you're looking for. So, make sure to use the things available to you. And if you have any questions, you can find information on our connections page, as I mentioned. So if you just go to departments and then you go to career planning and development, you can find information about internship searching, other career topics. You can also find our contact information here. So if you have questions, you can reach out to that Career CN at Webster. That's always a good starting point. So thank you so much.